Welcome again. We are in Joshua 9. Yes, we learned from Joshua 8 that they had set a trap at Ai and they had victory. And after that, they built an altar at Ai, the same way that with the direction that Moses gave them to follow, and they followed it after they built the altar. Now, we are in 9. Get ready for that by having your paper, your pencils, everything else ready for your notes. Also, this is the time I always ask you to share this video, like this video, and subscribe to the video, and also donate toward our ministry as the Lord put in your heart for you to donate. Okay? Now, let me start the reading. Now, when all the kings who were beyond the Jordan in the hill country and the lowland all along the coast of the great sea toward Lebanon, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites heard of this, they gathered together with one accord to fight Joshua and Israel. But when the inhabitant of Gibeon heard about Joshua, about what Joshua had done to Jericho and to Ai, they, on their part, acted with cunning. They went and prepared provision and took worn out sack for their donkeys and wineskin worn out and torn and mended with worn out patched sandals on their feet and worn out clothes, and all their provision were dry and molded. 6. They went to Joshua in the camp of Gilgad and said to him and to the Israelites, "We have come from a far country, so now make a treaty with us." But the Israelites said to the Hivites, "Perhaps you live among us. Then how can we make a treaty with you?" They said to Joshua, "We are your servant." And Joshua said to them, "Who are you? And where do you come from?" 9. They said to him, "Your servant have come from a very far country because of the name of the Lord your God. For we have heard a report of him, of all that he did in Egypt, and of all that he did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, King Sihon of Bashan and King Og of Bashan, King Sihon of Heshbon and King Og of Bashan, who live in Ashtaroth." 11. So our elders and all the inhabitants of our country said to us, "Take provision in your hand for the journey. Go to meet them and say to them, 'We are your servant. Come now, make a treaty with us.' 12. Here is our bread. It was still warm when we took it from our houses as our food for the journey on the day we set out to come to you. But now, see, it is dry and moldy. These wineskins were new when we filled them, and see, they are burst. And these garments and sandals of ours are worn out from the very long journey." 14. So the leaders partook of their provision and did not ask direction from the Lord. 15. And Joshua made peace with them, guaranteeing their lives by a treaty, and the leaders of the congregation swore an oath to them. 16. But when 3 days had passed after they had made a treaty with them, they heard that they were their neighbors and were living among them. So the Israelites set out in which their city on the third day. Now their city were Gibeon, Shepherah, Bewa, and Kiriath Jearim. 18. But the Israelites did not attack them because of the leaders of the congregation had sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel. Then all the congregation murmured against the leaders. But all the leaders said to all the congregation, we have sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel, and now we must not touch them. This is what we will do to them. We will let them live, so the wrath may not come upon us because of the oath that we swore to them. The leaders said to them, let them live. So they became hewers of wood and drawers of waters for all the congregation, and the leaders had decided concerning them. 22. Joshua summoned them and said to them, why did you deceive us, saying, we are very far from you, while in fact you are living among us now? Therefore you are cursed, and some of you shall always be slaves, hewers of wood and drawers of water for the house of my God. 24. They answered Joshua, because it was told to your servant for a certainty that the Lord your God has commanded his servant Moses to give you all the land and to destroy all the inhabitants of the land before you. So we were in great fear for our lives because of you, and did this thing. 25. And now we are in your hand. Do as it seems good and right in your sight to do to us. 26. This is what he did for them. He saved them from the Israelites, and they did not kill them. But on that day Joshua made them hewers of wood and drawers of water for the congregation and for the altar of the Lord, to continue to this day in the place that he should choose. Okay. Let's do a overall review of verse 1 to verse 27. Then we're going to do individual verses. Royal allegiance has special status for Gibeonites, the sequel to the victory at Ai, and the Ebal covenant is presented in two aspects. Formulation of a wide-ranging coalition of kings and people in verse 1 to 2. And a treaty with the people of Gibeon in verse 3 to verse 27. Okay, verse 3 to verse 27. Verse 1 to verse 15, he talk about the Gibeonite deception. The Gibeonite deception. And we're going to go into that. Alright? Hittites, Jebusite. To this list should probably be added a seventh, Girgashites, as in Joshua 3 verse 10. Initial success facilitated by one or two unusual events in the natural order polarized the power elite and existing population group, except for the area dominated by Shechem. The number of independent city-states in Canaan seem nearly to have doubled between the 14th and 12th century BCE. There is no direct correlation between this list and the account of 6 cities and 7 kings defeated in Joshua 10, verse 28 to verse 39. Okay? Now, let me give you a quick review of 1 to 4. Then we're going to continue on with the individual verses. There are 2 contrasting reactions to the news about Israel's victories. The king of the various people gathered to fight, like we said before in verse 2. But the citizen of Gibeon acted with cunning in verse 4. Okay? One. Now, let's continue on. Verse 2. With one accord, under one command. The abrupt conclusion suggests that another battle story once followed at this point, perhaps something relating to the area west and north of Shechem. Okay? If you look at chapter 12, verse 17 and 18, it will give you the name of the town. The town list is on that chapter. Okay? Chapter 12, verse 17 to verse 18. Now, let's continue on. Verse 3 to verse 27. Talk about the treaty with Gibeon. Right? On verse 3 to verse 15. Deal with the protection of Gibeon. Verse 16 to verse 27. With the exploitation of Gibeon and its allied town. The treaty was highly problematical from Israel's side in view of the prohibition set forth in Deuteronomy 20, verse 10 to verse 18. Read Deuteronomy 20, verse 10 to verse 18. The tradition is central. Historicity is undergirded by the account of the famine during David's reign that was traced to Saul's blood guilt because he put the Gibeonites to death on 2 Samuel 21 verse 1. Now, that's 2 Samuel 21 verse 1. Saul put the Gibeonites to death. Now, continue on with individual verses. Verse 3. Okay. But when the inhabitant of Gibeon heard that Joshua had what Joshua had done to Jericho and to Ai, the liberation initiated by the inhabitant of a town that has no king. Gibeon lies on an important east-west road from Jericho that descends to the coastal plain through the valley of Aijalon. It was at most a small village in the 12th century BCE. Like Jericho, Ai and the other towns in this story And verse 17. Okay. Verse 17 for you. So the Israelites set out and reached their cities on the third day. Now their cities were Gibeon, Shepherah, Givoth, and Kiriath Jearim. Now, okay. Now let's do verse 6. They went to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal and said to him and to the Israelites, we have come from a far country, so now make a treaty with us. Their argument rests on being from a far country. Right? They also said that in verse 9. In verse 9, let me read verse 9 for you. They said to him, your servant have come from a very far country because of the name of the Lord your God. For we have heard a report on him of all that he did in Egypt, being far from a very far country, except exempting them from extermination required by Deuteronomy 20, verse 16 to verse 18. Let me read Deuteronomy 20 for you. Let me start from verse 10. When you draw near to a town to fight against it, offer a term of peace. 11. If it accept your term of peace and surrender to you, then all the people in it shall serve you at forced labor. That's why they had to go draw the wood in the water, forced labor. Right? If it does not submit to you peacefully, but make war against you, then you shall besiege it. And when the Lord your God give it into your hand, you shall put all the male to the sword. Verse 14. You may, however, take as your booty the woman, the children, livestock, and everything else in the town. All is spoil. You may enjoy the spoil of your enemies, which the Lord your God has given you. Though you shall treat all the towns that are very far from you with which are not town of the nation here. 16. But as for the town of these people that the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, you must not let anything that breathes remain alive. You must annihilate them, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, just as the Lord your God has commanded. Okay? So that they may not teach you to do all the abhorrent thing that they do to their God, and you thus sin against the Lord your God. Now, let's continue on with verse 6. A treaty verse 6. Okay. They were not to have any relationship with them. Okay. In reality, they are Hivites, one of the nation to be destroyed. And Joshua 9 verse 1, Deuteronomy 20 verse 17. A treaty with any who live among Israel was forbidden. And Deuteronomy 7 verse 2. Okay. An abrupt mention of Gilgal is jarring. That the people of Gibeon are Hivites suggests ancestral origin in Galicia, in which case they tell a half-truth. They came from a far country, but not recently. Okay? But not recently. Now, let's do verse 8. They said to Joshua, "We are your servant." And Joshua said to them, "Who are you, and where do you come from?" Their language about being servant is respectful, but it is also ironic in light of verse 21, verse 23, and also verse 27. Let me read verse 21 for you. The leader said to them, "Let them live." So they become hewers of wood and drawers of waters for all the congregation. And the leaders had decided concerning them. Become servant, right? 23. Now therefore you are cursed, and some of you shall always be slaves, hewers of wood and drawers of water for the house of my God. They become servant. With your mouth you curse yourself, you bless yourself. Okay, 27. But on that day Joshua made them hewers of wood and drawers of water for the congregation and for the altar of the Lord, and continue to this day in the place that he should choose. Why? They become servant. They told Joshua they were servant, so now they are servant. Case closed. Verse 9 and 10. They said to him, "Your servant have come from a very far country because of the name of the Lord your God. For we have heard report of him, of all that he did in Egypt," 10, "and of all that he did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, King Sihon of Heshbon and King Og of Bashan, who lived in Ashtaroth." Right? Their speech is similar, and Rahab is similar to Rahab confession in Joshua 2, verse 10 to verse 11, but is hypocritical. Okay? Since that speech is similar to Rahab and Joshua 10, verse 10, Joshua 2, verse 10, 11, based on Deuteronomy 2, verse 26, all the way down to Deuteronomy 3, verse 17. Then you move up to Joshua 12, verse 1 and 6. In epic tradition, and Numbers 21, verse 21 to 35. Okay, write down your references where you could see the similarities of the verses that we are talking about right now in Joshua 9. Okay? In Joshua 14. Joshua 14. So the leaders partook of their provision and did not ask direction from the Lord. They did not ask direction from the Lord. That's a big no-no. Can't do that. Look how they curse themselves. They're gonna can't have the enemy living among you. They were supposed to kill everybody from those towns. They're not supposed to be alive. If they had asked direction from the Lord would say, don't take them into the camp. But they are being deceived. Anyway, a lot of us make the same mistake when we don't ask direction from God before we do something. Okay? Joshua find himself having to ratify negotiation undertaken by anonymous Israelites, and for which he did not originally responsible. The reading and the Greek which specify the leaders in this verse is to be rejected. The leaders are those who will propose a way out of the predicament in verse 16 to verse 27. Epic tradition explicitly associates Joshua with the divinatory techniques, decision of the Urim, in Numbers 27, verse 18 to verse 21. Numbers 27, verse 18 to verse 21. Now, chapter 15. And Joshua made peace with them, guaranteeing their lives by a treaty. And the leaders of the congregation swore an oath to them. Now, in verse 15, this half verse is the compiler splices. Verse 15, and Joshua made peace with them, guaranteeing their lives by a treaty. And the leader of the congregation swore an oath to them. All three Israelite parties fall for the ruse. The originary Israelites in verse 6 and verse 7. Let me read verse 6 and verse 7 for you. They went to Joshua in the camp of Gilgal and said to him and to the Israelites, we have come from a far country, so now make a treaty with us. But the Israelites said to the Hivites, the Perizzite, who lives among us. But the Israelites said to the Hivites, perhaps you live among us. Then how can we make a treaty with you? Right? And verse 6 and 7. Men is the better reading. Taste the evidence. Joshua made peace. The leaders of the congregation swore an oath. Gibeonites retained their special status as a foreign enclave down to the reign of David. In 2 Samuel 21, verse 1 to 6. Okay. Verse 16 to verse 17. But when 3 days had passed, after they had made a treaty with them, they heard that they were their neighbors and were living among them. They, from verse 16 to verse 27, their secret was discovered and they received the punishment of their lives. The fear of verse 7 are realized. The Gibeonites indeed are living among them. This supplement and sequel is from an independent and very possible older account from verse 16 to verse 27. Okay? Verse 17. So the Israelites set out and reached their cities on the third day. Now their cities were Gibeon, Shepherah, Beeroth, and Kiriath Jearim. Mention of their cities is the first hint in the chapter that more than one settlement might be involved. The full name, all very small villages in the 20th century BCE. In the 12th century, the full name, all very small villages in the 12th century BCE, controlled the entire northwest quadrant of approach to Jerusalem. Verse 18. But the Israelites did not attack them, because the leaders of the congregation had sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel. Then all the congregation murmured against the leader. The leaders appear 10 times in Joshua, always in context that may consider contribution of the final redactor in Joshua 9 verse 15, and in Joshua 18 it was named twice. Let me read chapter 9 verse 15 for you so you can see that. And Joshua made peace with them, guaranteeing their lives by treaty, and the leaders of the congregation swore an oath to them. 18, so you will hear it again. But the Israelites did not attack them, because the leaders of the congregation had sworn an oath to them, the God of Israel. Again, then all the congregation murmured against the leaders. Right? Now, and also in verse 19, but all the leaders said to all the congregation, we have sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel, and now we must not touch them. Verse 21, the leaders, the leaders said to them, let them live, so they may become hewers of wood and drawers of water. For all the congregation as the leaders had decided concerning them. You could see that again on verse 27. Okay? But on that day, Joshua made them hewers of wood and drawers of water for the congregation and for the altar of the Lord. The congregation to this day in the place that he chooses. To continue to this day in the place that he chooses. Okay? Okay? That was in, the leaders was mentioned in Joshua 9, verse 15, verse 18 twice, verse 19, verse 21. Also, Joshua 13, verse 21, Joshua 17, verse 4, Joshua 22, verse 14, also in verse 30 and verse 22, which is called shifts. Okay? There is a strong rhetorical relationship between this story and the altar narrative in chapter 22. Congregation, Hebrews word for Edah, E-D-A-H, like the word for assembly in Hebrew, Kahal, K-A-H-A-L, as in Joshua 8, verse 35. There is not a sword, there is not a word of all that Moses commanded that Joshua did not read before the assembly of Israel, and the woman, and the little one, and the alien who reside among them. Okay? Is nearly non-existence in texts of Samuel and Kings referring to the monarchical era, which is used in this story for the first time in Joshua in verse 15, verse 18 twice, verse 19, 21, and verse 27. It occurs another 6 times in the Hebrew text of the altar story in Joshua 22, verse 12, verse 16, 17, 18, 20, and 30. The word for assembly and congregation reflect the parallel cultivation of the tradition by different Levitical priestly families, with the transition to monarchy. The old deliberative assembly congregation was displaced by royal appointed official, only to come into prominence again as a term for the worshiping community after destruction of the state and demise of the royal festival post in 586 BC, 587 BCE. Okay? Let's continue on. Verse 18 to 21. We read verse 18 for you already. Let me read verse 20. This is what we will do to them. We will let them live, so that wrath may not come upon us because of the oath that we swore to them. Okay? The phrase sworn to them by the Lord, swore to them, is stated 3 times in quick recession, emphatically locating responsibility. Negotiation of status as heroes of wood. and drawers of water is an ironic inversion of covenantal equality. For in Deuteronomy 29 verse 11, which uses exactly this description for the sojourner, the implication of the covenant is precisely to erase distinction of status that otherwise attached to various subgroups. The, the sanctity of the oath must be preserved, but this deception has endangered the community and must be punished. The expression "hewers of wood and drawers of water" indicate a subservient class, right? Like we said before in Deuteronomy 29 verse 11. In verse 22, Joshua summoned them and said to them, "Why did you deceive us, saying, we are very..." Joshua summoned them and said to them, "Why did you deceive us, saying, we are very far from you, while in fact you are living among us?" Joshua summarized their deceit by contrasting very far, which they said in verse 6 and also in verse 9, with living among us in verse 7 and also in verse 16. Okay? Sometimes you have to let the enemy know that you know their plan. You know that they are living among you. Now, verse 23. Now, therefore, you are cursed, and some of you shall always be slaves, hewers of wood and drawers of water for the house of my God. Some Gibeonites are to be servant of the house of my God, which is a temple. Okay, that is the temple. Now, they are cursed for bearing false witnesses, for lying. The house of my God, that was almost certainly a Yahweh's temple at Shelah, and most certainly and very possibly one at Gilgad. Okay? Now, I will give you my review of this. Now, let's do the final verse 27. The etiological formula to continue to this day signals narrative motivation, providing ironic legitimation for exploitation of Gibeonites. Very likely the place that he, Yahweh, should choose in Deuteronomy 12, verse 5, verse 11, 14, 18, 21, 26, and repeatedly, was so designated by the presence of the Ark of the Covenant, as on Mount Ebal in the preceding unit on 8 verse 33. The effect is to startle readers by clearing the air for a fresh look at what comes next. Yahweh will honor the problematical treaty. We're going to see what they will do, how their lives will be among the Israelites, right? How their lives will be among the Israelites, and how the kings who went in there pretending to be paupers, pretending to be poor, dressing in rags, and carrying moldy food with them, who is then turned into servants, how their lives will end in the next chapter, chapter 10. So wait for chapter 10, okay? I'm sure you're going to like that reading, and hopefully it will help you grow in your faith in the Lord. Remember, they were not to keep any of them alive, but because they did not consult with the Lord and made a very bad decision, right? Without consulting to God, and let them stay among their midst, and said they will not hurt them, even though they were from the neighboring town that was going to be attacked by God. Let's wait and see. Peace be unto you. Share this video, like this video, and come back again for Joshua 10. Shalom.